Collingwood have just defeated the Western Bulldogs at the MCG in an absolute thriller. And I think the Pies are going to look back on this one and see it as a season, or potentially a season-defining performance, just the way they were able to sort of grit through the difficult moments in this one, because the Western Bulldogs just would not stop coming at them. And I think they were really impressive as well in defeat with all of the players that they've got out of the side. I think the intensity that they brought to this game was absolutely unbelievable, but they were probably in the end, just in the big moments, they were kind of found out a little bit by the more experienced Collingwood side, and a Collingwood side that were able to control the game a little bit better overall. I do want to talk about overall in this game, though, some of the big performances, because there were many. And if you look at the individual performances, I think there were almost more performances just that stood out from a Western Bulldogs perspective. You look at Ed Richards, you look at Sam Darcy, you look at Bailey Dale, you look at Tom Liberatore in the midfield. All of those players were absolutely at it tonight, whether they were sticking their head over the ball, whether they were setting up play from behind the ball like Bailey Dale, or taking massive contested marks like Sam Darcy. That was an unbelievable performance to watch. From a Collingwood perspective, I think the best players, you're looking at Nick Daicos. I think Darcy Moore, even though he was at times destroyed by Sam Darcy, I think he worked himself into the game, particularly after half time. I thought Scott Pendlebury was really good in some big moments. And also Jamie Elliott. I think he's probably had an underrated start to this season. I think last year he was really well down on his output. So seeing him be able to stand up and just be like, he's such a handful, just the amount of attributes that this guy has from a ground level point of view. His aerial work's unbelievable. And then he's such a clutch finisher most of the time, although he did have a couple of misses in this game. Now, talking about the game from a moment by moment point of view, I think Western Bulldogs came with that intensity in the first quarter, and it really shocked Collingwood off the bat. They weren't able to get any of this game on their terms. I think the centre clearances in that first quarter were absolutely dominant from the Western Bulldogs, and the fact that they have a weapon like Sam Darcy inside forward 50, it was just such a helping hand. He was taking big contested marks on Darcy Moore down there, and they really just weren't able to handle it. And when you're getting those quick entries, when it's a 6-6-6 and there's one-on-one options in the forward line, Darcy is just such a weapon in those one-on-one situations. So if I just come in and have a look at Sam Darcy's stats, he had 15 disposals for the game, 11 kicks and 4 handballs, but 8 marks is that total there. And if we go and have a look at the breakdown, look at this, 6 contested marks, which is an absolutely enormous number, and 4 marks inside 50 as well. So you could mount an argument a little bit in that first quarter overall. The injury to Reef McInnes, I think that really did hurt Collingwood's structure overall. I think he's been really solid there and looks like he's developing as a key defensive option for them. That's really sad for him. I think he's done a knee. It sounds like an ACL or a probable ACL for Reef McInnes. So not what he needed when he's really starting to pick up some momentum in his career, but that really helped the Western Bulldogs just get on top of that back line. And I think it took a little while for Collingwood to settle, but I think Sam Darcy is going to do this to multiple teams throughout the season. He's just going to be at that height and with that athleticism, he's just going to be too difficult to deal with. And you mount on top of that, some of the field kicking of Sam Darcy tonight was outrageous as well. He moves so well for a player that size. It's just outrageous. So what a pickup the Western Bulldogs have in Darcy, and he's going to win some games for them this season. You talk about the second quarter, so that I think that's when the game really started to shift after quarter time, and those small forwards for Collingwood got into the game. And also from a clearance point of view, I think Collingwood started to get on top, not necessarily from a centre clearance point of view, sort of holistically, but they were able to get on top from those stoppage clearances. Nick Daicos was absolutely crucial here. Steele Sidebottom came into the game, and you saw the class of someone like Scott Pendlebury, who was able to sort of create forward of centre. I think he had 11 score involvements for the game. But it was those high half forwards that were coming up and really impacting the game. I look at Jamie Elliott, who was probably a little bit deeper, but he was sort of the one getting on the end of the good work from players like Bo McCreary, from Lachie Schultz, who were applying a lot of pressure and just able to, from that stoppage clearance dominance, those guys were able to trap the ball inside 50 and just make it really difficult for the Dogs defenders to sort of clear the ball out of that congestion. Overall, if you look at the game from a complete point of view, I think Western Bulldogs were the better sort of turnover team in this game, and Collingwood were able to control territory and keep the ball locked inside forward 50 like they like to do. To kind of show that territorial dominance on the stat sheet here, you can kind of see that through the inside 50s, where Collingwood had 50 to the Western Bulldogs 43. So they had that territorial dominance. Mainly that was coming from the around the ground stoppages. As I said, if you look at the centre clearances there in isolation, the Dogs actually won that statistic 14-7. I'm not 100% sure what the scores were, but when you look at players like Liberatore was absolutely dominant from those centre clearances, as was Ed Richards. They were feeding it out to those runners like Sam Davidson, Joel Frazier, those types of players. So they were getting really direct clearances. And that was to move the ball as quickly as they possibly could to get the ball to an isolated Sam Darcy. So that was a real success for them, but they lost those around the ground stoppages where Collingwood were able to really pack out the midfield, get the ball forward, and as I said, lock it in. So if you look at the stoppage clearances there, 29-21, and that's where Collingwood sort of controlled territory in this game. But another thing that Collingwood were able to do really well is just keep the ball off the Western Bulldogs. And if you go down here to the time in possession statistics for the match, 46% time in possession to the Western Bulldogs, just 38%. And that number went up as the game went on. So Collingwood were able to sort of inflict their game plan on the Western Bulldogs. And the longer the game lasted, the more they were able to inflict that on them. And they kept the ball off them. The Western Bulldogs continued to want a fast play. And as they started to tire, as they started to put more miles into their legs, more errors came, more turnovers came. And I think by the third quarter is when Collingwood really started to imprint their game plan on the Western Bulldogs. And by the last quarter, Western Bulldogs were really just bombing the ball to an isolated Sam Darcy, who had often two players coming across. It was a Darcy Moore who was able to get his intercept game going. And that's why I said off the top, I think he was one of the more impressive performers, just how he was able to kind of withstand that barrage that came at him from Sam Darcy. Some of those big contested marks would have been very demoralising for Darcy Moore, and he got himself back into the game, and probably by the end of it was sort of winning that battle on some level. I mentioned off the top some of those Western Bulldogs midfielders, how dominant they were from particularly centre clearances, but they also were, had some big numbers around the ground. I thought Ed Richards' game, he was able to gain meterage after meterage. I think he had around 600 metres for the game. But it is worth noting that the Dogs were really pinned back in their defensive half at times. If you have a look at some of the kind of heat maps there of their midfielders. This is Ed Richards here. So 47% in the defensive half for Ed Richards compared to 53% in the offensive half. He'd really generally have more of a 60-40 split there. If you look at his possessions, you can see most of them are in the middle of the ground there, but he is pinned back at time in that back half for moments, and you'd want Ed Richards being more forward of the football. You have a look at someone like a Tom Liberatore here, probably another one that had some of the highest centre bounces. He's 59% in the defensive half compared to 41% in the offensive half as well. So both of these players were very impactful at those centre clearances through the middle of the ground, which you can see there from the red spot, but they definitely spent more time in that back half of the ground. But it is clear to see here that all of their work was done from the centre clearances. Ed Richards had 4 centre clearances. Tom Liberatore had 4 centre clearances as well. Nick Daicos, on the other hand, was really ineffectual from those centre clearances. He did all his work from the around the ground clearances, but he was able to move, he was able to find space, and he was able to help Collingwood control the football ultimately, and he was able to get out of those around the ground clearances, make space, and create score involvements. He had 11 for the game. He had 543 metres gained as well. So he was really damaging in his own way, but it was more through a controlled method. And I think that grew on Collingwood definitely throughout the game. If you look at the early parts of the game, it was a more chaotic game, and Western Bulldogs really were able to control things in the way that they wanted to control things. And I think they did that from shutting down both Josh Daicos and Dan Houston. I think Dan Houston was pretty ineffectual throughout the entire game, but Josh Daicos was one that was able to work his way back into the game, and he really had some nice moments with his brother Nick where they were able to control the game. You've got players like Steele Sidebottom operating on those wings as well. Scott Pendlebury as well, able to control the football, as well as players like Jack Crisp as well. So Collingwood overall, I think the experience won out, and you put that up against the Dogs, who blooded a lot of young players in this game. I think about Sam Davidson, who's only playing his second game. I think about Josh Dolan, who I think had some really nice moments in the first quarter, but Western Bulldogs really ultimately had to do it a different way. And when you're trying to rush the ball forward so quickly, play on so quickly, there are going to be more mistakes made. And I think in the end, the fact that Collingwood were able to sort of conserve energy in those early parts of the game and then really run over the Western Bulldogs in the end, I think that kind of showed overall in the 2 contrasting game styles. We do have to talk about Rory Lobb as well, sometimes a maligned figure at the Western Bulldogs, but I thought he was absolutely outstanding today. He really shut down Dan McStay. There were some big contests, and I think Rory Lobb's ability to be able to just get a fist in, do that defensive work, get up the ground, take a few intercepts, and actually use the ball by foot as well himself. It shows you what an unbelievably good player this guy can be at times. You just kind of want to see it for him a bit more consistently, and I think if he can have a little bit of consistency over this early part of the season, have some good games, I think when Bontempelli and Treloar and those sorts of players start to come back into this team, the Western Bulldogs will be much better for the run overall. I think overall for the Pies, an interesting conversation is going to be around that forward line. I think tonight it sort of worked, but there were at different times in the game, they weren't able to be as clinical, I think, as they would have liked. I still think there's a little bit of a lack of quality around those half forward. As far as their ball use goes, players like Lachie Schultz and Beau McCreary, they were effectual tonight for sure. The way that they pressured, the way that they tackled, and they got up to stoppage and helped out to win those clearances and to win that territory battle. But there still were some moments, and you're wondering how this forward line fully operates with Membry, McStay, Mychek, and then how the smalls sort of all interact. I think Bobby Hill had a quiet game today. Jamie Elliott sort of stood up in his absence. So that's going to be a watch, and I think the first sort of 5-6 rounds of the season are going to tell us a big story about how that forward line is going to look for Collingwood. But I think overall that was just a great battle to watch. I think a really sort of backs up against the wall performance from the Western Bulldogs, but Collingwood also did well to sort of absorb what they threw at them. I'm starting to lose my voice now. I've been talking too much over the last 2 days. I better wrap this up, but thanks again for listening, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.